Welcome to A Mason's Work, the podcast where we review Masonic symbols and illustrate how they can be used to solve problems in everyday life. With your host, Brian Mattox, a proud member of the Craftsman Online Media Network.
So as we continue talking about planning and planning as a successful way to essentially build your future, we're going to start to use a bit of an example. And it's easier for the older men listening in the audience, or the older people listening in the audience here, to understand some of these things because you've experienced them firsthand. But for the younger guys, explore this more as a thought exercise. So imagine you're in your mid-20s, you're single, it's early in your career, you've discovered kind of maybe a pull towards the sea. Maybe you want to go sailing and you really want to build that as a hobby, as a long-term thing. Or maybe it's rock climbing, right? You like the mountains and you want to, explore the ability to, climb over, these obstacles. Something that demands skill, patience, and a relationship with conditions that you can't fully control. When you're young, you have the time, you've got the curiosity, and you have very, very few competing obligations. By any measure, being young is kind of the season of abundance. When we take out our 24-inch gauge in that process, when you're planning at that time, we're going to use it a little bit differently than if you were planning for a different stage or phase in your life. So in the immediate moment, right, when you break out the 24-inch gauge, let's look at the right now. In this situation, as that young person, with the available time you have, how much time are you willing to allocate towards that relative to your vocation, relative to, your social obligations, all that kind of stuff? How much time can you allocate here? And to what, relative to your current conditions, what does the best use of your time look like? For example, even let's say you're listening to this podcast, right? And you're out and you're driving around, right? Is now the time to break out a book and read about knots? Probably not. Please don't do this. When you are looking at what you can do in the moment, maybe the answer is you start reflecting on what you love about that project, or what you love about that hobby, what you love about sailing. Maybe your present moment stuff has to be a little bit different than your tomorrow stuff, right? The plan that you have for today and the plan you have for tomorrow are different based on how much visibility you have into your everyday life. When we look across different time horizons, it requires us to change and grow and expand our scope. So when we're planning for the next 10 minutes and planning for the next 24 hours seem very similar, but there are some nuanced differences, right? Planning for next 6 months versus the next year and a half versus the next phase of our life. In the young man example, maybe, where we are now and for the foreseeable future, the next year and a half, you're kind of in that, position of abundance. But, at some point you're going to start a family probably, or potentially, and you're going to have other obligations. And when you move to the next phase, you have to have a much broader view into what your time horizons look like and what your conditions are going to look like in order to navigate those things successfully. You don't want your plans to be dropped by the wayside for a lack of thinking through some easy and obvious things like, hey, when I have a third of the time in my future than I do now to do these things, what can I do to continue to pursue that hobby even with less time? When we increase our scope over time and look at a much broader set of conditions and capacities and capabilities and willingness and emotional content and all that kind of stuff, we begin to realize that what has to happen with our plans as they move forward in time is they have to, in many ways, get a little bit more vague. They have to be less specific and more directional. And that's okay, right? When you overprescribe a future to like, hey, I'm going to be at this specific place at this specific time, 3.5 years from now, that's really trying to do something that is really probably not advisable. That's not to say you can't, not to say it's impossible. I'm not trying to tell you what you can and can't do. What I'm suggesting to you is, as you make plans, when you look through the future plans you're making, the more rigid they are, the more inflexible they are, the more they require a very specific set of conditions to work, the more likely they are to fail. They become fragile, and as they become fragile and edified, they stop working. And again, the perils of that we talked about yesterday is when your plans stop working, you begin to take that potentially and internalize it and turn into a whole series of negative things that erode your ability to perform in the future. So looking out over these horizons with goals and hobbies and plans in mind, all that kind of stuff, think about the increase in scope over time that you're going to have in your plans to accommodate those failure modes, to accommodate the success mode, to accommodate all of the things you're going to need to prepare for so that your plan can survive contact with reality.
The views represented in this podcast are those of the speaker alone and are not representative of any grand or subordinate lodge.
Hi, Brian here. I wanted to thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you have any suggestions or guidance for further episodes you'd like to see or hear, whatever the case may be, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at amasonswork.com, and we will try and incorporate your suggestions into a future recording. Thanks.
Freemasonry teaches us that the true work is within, a lifelong journey of reflection, discipline, and discovery. At A Mason's Work, we help Masons bring out their best selves through meaningful self-inquiry and symbolic practice. From personal reflection to lodge engagement, we offer tools that turn symbols into action. Visit us at amasonswork.com. The work is within. The time is now.